Today we're talking with Ricky Scoggan, a marriage and family therapist. And before we go into the subject for today, why don't you tell us about your practice and its contact information for anyone that would like to get in touch with you later?
Oh yeah, no problem. I actually work both in residential treatment for a company called New Roads Treatment Center, which this isn't necessarily for them, but I also have I work in a private practice called Crossroads. So I have New Roads and I have Crossroads.
All right.
But Crossroads is one where it's private, and so I take people as they need. And
Great.
my number is 801-809-2601, and you can contact me about a multitude of issues. And if it's not something that I can help you with, then it's something I could definitely refer you out to or introduce somebody to another professional in my field, and hopefully reach out.
Do you have a website or email address you'd want anyone to know about?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Not at this point.
Well, let's start over then.
Sure. Oh,
No.
my bad.
I'll start over so that I don't, that way it just goes straight to, if you're only going to give a phone number, we won't have that awkward, sorry, I don't.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Everything else is fine, so go ahead and you can just retread the same ground. I just want to ask you about websites or email.
Okay.
You don't have an email?
Not one that is like.
Do you want to make one up right now?
It goes through my companies.
Do you want to make one up right now and then
do it?
And then create? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
If you'd like, that's usually, there's a lot of people that would benefit from that. So if you wanted to say, even if it was Gmail, you could say something like that. Do you want to?
I can do my Gmail account. I'll just do that.
No, you don't have to. I want you to have as much. Yeah, because a lot of people might want to say, I would prefer to email you before I call because I have a couple of things I just want you to read over and say, maybe you'll get back to me and tell me, but it's up to you.
Okay.
If you don't want to give out anything but a phone number, that's more than sufficient.
That's fine. I can do an email. I'll do it. Yeah.
Whatever. Okay. Today I'm speaking with Ricky Scoggan, a marriage and family therapist, and before we talk about the topic today, would you give them your practice information and where they can contact you?
Yeah, definitely. I do marriage and family therapy. I work at it's called Crossroads Therapeutic Services, and my number is 801-809-2601. And at this point, you can reach me at ricky.scoggan, SCOGGAN, @gmail.com.
Good. So remember, that's Scoggan with an A, not Scoggan or Scoggans, SCOGGAN.
SCOGGAN.
Yeah, Ricky.Scoggan, is that what you said it
Yes.
was? All right. Well, as you know, when I talked about you before we signed on, I ask each person for a subject that they are interested in or near and dear to your heart. So what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about some of kind of like the borderline between health and the legal issues that come with divorce, and some of the results that happen, and kind of some of the areas where we could probably even use a little bit of change in our legal system.
Excellent. Because, in my opinion as a divorce and family lawyer,
Right.
the legal system oftentimes picks and chooses as to what theories and what they want to agree with. They'll claim that men are no different than women when it suits their decision to treat men and women the same. And when it suits them to treat men differently from women, they'll do that too. If they want to claim that little children are extremely vulnerable, they'll claim there's a theory in the mental health professions about that. Or they'll say, oh, children are remarkably resilient.
Right.
So, and you know what, obviously there's truth to that, but let's face it, people should be a little more honest with themselves and more honest with the litigants if they're saying, it's like, let me tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from, and if I'm current on my understanding of mental health as a judge, great. If I'm not, have the humility to say, you know what, I'm really not basing this on science as much as what I just feel to be correct and what little science I may have or have not. So, what do you want to start? You want to talk about changes in the legal system or frustrations or things that you don't understand or don't agree with, or do you want to talk about families going through the transitions of divorce or the pain and suffering? Or?
Sure, we can start with that. I mean, I think you kind of nailed it on the head, where science is kind of catching up and overlapping what the legal system has to offer, and now we're getting to a point where we're seeing a lot of families that are just being torn apart by it. A lot of judges aren't understanding like the needs for having both the mom and the dad in a child's life and what that means for the child and how they're going to grow up with greater mental health simply because of the fact that a family can work together even if they're divorced.
This brings up a thought that we have not, this is not scripted, and so I will see this quite often, is some judges and commissioners will say, well, because the parents fight with each other so much about every little petty thing, I can only conclude that the children will be harmed by experiencing or spectating to this. So I will eliminate the fighting by giving the kids most of the time to one parent, because that way they don't have to argue over as many different things. What do you say to that?
Yeah, there's a lot to that. What if, like theoretically, what if they were court ordered to work together? Then how would their attitudes change? Or you also look at it from the child's perspective. Mom and dad don't live together, but they do fight. But what they fight about, does that matter to the child? Or what really matters to the child?
An important point.
Right.
If they're fighting over the equity in the house, if they're fighting over who's taking what debts, if they're fighting over which one of them should spend how much time with which child on a birthday, if the kids aren't witnessing this, if the kids aren't aware of it, how can the judge then say, well, I know that you're going to take this home? I understand that they might fear that it will happen.
Right.
But there are some who will actually argue, and I think correctly, just because I'm going hammer and tongs up against my wife or husband does not mean that I'm exposing the kids to this. And there's no evidence that I am, so why, Your Honor, are you concluding that this is happening? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That bugs me when they say, well, the fact that you two can't get along is meaning that you won't be able to co-parent effectively. Now what's interesting is there are some that I've spoken to that have said there is a difference. Sometimes there are squabbles between parents that indicate that this is something that they will take home to the kids or that they will tell the kids about. There are others where I had one psychologist say, I believe that once the court makes, just like you said, once the court makes an order, they will comply with the order and they'll find other ways to fight, but they won't fight over custody anymore because it's a done deal.
Exactly.
Do you think that's true?
No, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I've seen it. I mean, I think you'll see people that will try to, chafe against that. But I've seen a lot of judges and commissioners who think, I will squelch any type of harm to the kids by making it, or at least they think, seemingly making it impossible for parents to fight by essentially killing off one parent. It's like very little contact, very little opportunity to interact with the other parent, hardly any decision-making authority. Well, great. You can't fight if you don't have any power. I think that does the parents and children a great disservice. But perhaps I'm mistaken.
No, absolutely. I think that when you look at the structure of a family or the system in whole, and then you add a court system into it, majority of the time they are focused on what harm can come if this happens, or what harm can come if this happens.
Now that's interesting.
What about the benefit?
Right, you mentioned, and the other thing is that I think a lot of litigants, and maybe even people in your position, don't understand that, or may not consider as much, that the court, in my opinion, my humble opinion, they want to say, what orders can I make so that this doesn't come back to me all the time? Sometimes it's like, I want to do something so that it's so neatly tied up that nobody will come back. I like to describe it sometimes as, I've broken the spirit of the non-custodial parent. That person has been so marginalized, so painted into a corner, that that person may not be happy, but it's so hard to come back and get any kind of change, they just give up seeking change.
Yep.
You ever?
No, that happens. It happens too often. I've known plenty of people that have been through this process, and it's like every single one of them has this story that they're just defeated. In psychology, you call it learned helplessness. You finally give up. You get to a point where you give up fighting, and I think that is the way that the system's designed.
What kind of changes, even though we may be leaping ahead a little bit, what kind of problems have you seen and changes you'd like to see made if you got to influence policy and law?
Okay. Well, if I got to influence policy and law, I would do a 50-50 custody split, both legal and physical custody. California has already done that. They seem to be doing pretty well with it. There's a lot of research out there that doesn't directly tie into why that works, but there's a lot of research in there that is so similar in comparison to know that it brings the families systems together. And so when we look at the way that this is a systemic issue, and when I say that, it means that it's not just one judge making a decision, because as soon as that decision is made, it affects everyone. It affects the mom, it affects the dad, it affects the children. And so when we take a step back and we look at it as a systemic issue, we're looking at what can go where. Why can we not look at what needs to happen to make it work? Families are going to divorce. We're not going to be able to stop that. But when we look at the entire issue, how can we make these two people get along that are no longer married? Or if we can't make them get along, how can we make them interact in such a way that these kids are going to be healthy, safe, and have both parents?
It's funny as you mention that, because I also think that too often the judges and commissioners say to themselves, what's in it for me? But then say, well, I can't make an order that says, this ought to keep you out of my courtroom for a good long time. So they have to couch it in different language, and they have to say, oh, this is for the benefit of the children. This is for the benefit of mom in this regard, or dad in this regard, or the benefit of other people involved with his family. It's like, and you read it and you're going, well, maybe, but there were like so many other ways to skin that cat that were easier and better. Why did you do it this way? And the only thing I can conclude is, well, this was the best interest of the court that was being considered. It doesn't happen all the time. There are thoughtful judges and commissioners out there, certainly.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the point, you're right, because it's like saying, hey, what are you making work, Your Honor? Are you making it so that this benefits the court? Are you making it so it benefits the kids at the expense of the parents, needlessly? Mm-hmm. Are you making it benefit the parents at the expense of the kids? Are you benefiting mom at the expense of dad? Mm-hmm. And there are ways that you can't guarantee the future, but you can at least structure it better.
Exactly.
There, for example, the old give the kids to mom and not to dad. Just before we started filming, we said, that's changing, because nobody can deny that the stay-at-home mom and the 9-to-5 dad just isn't reality anymore.
Yeah,
there's still those out there, but they're fewer and fewer. And so the idea in the past of, well, we can just presume the kids are better off with mom, I'm sure that was a safe bet 20, 30 years ago. It may still be a safe bet now, but it's a bet. And let the evidence tell us what to do. Let the data point us in the direction we ought to go, as opposed to just taking a stab at what we think is a safe risk.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, and that ties into a lot of issues. I could bring up a lot of different topics, but one that comes to mind almost immediately is when most people enter young adulthood, 20 years ago, they used to be able to leave their house, get a job, and sustain. Nowadays, the average time that people come home, we call them boomerang children, they go out, they come home, is the average time is 4 before they can get a successful launch. 4 times. So
what's funny is that, you just look at my reaction. I'm not 20 years old, and so to me, I'm just thinking like, those bums. And yet, there may be very good reasons, and it's a different world than I lived in when I was 20.
It is. So when you look, when you look at a mother that gets all the obligation of the child, and here she is, she's probably at an age, because it's typical that it's around between ages 19 to about 30. I don't know. That would be more on your end. But a mother that would have to take on all these kids, or even one kid, in today's society, the way that the economy is set up, she's going to end up moving back home. She's not going to be able to go through the developmental stage that is necessary for her to be able to survive on her own, because now she's caught up into a situation where she's taking care of baby, she has mom helping her or dad helping her, and then she's trying to make it on her own.
And
it's very stressful.
Right, and if you get a guy like me that's looking at that as, why don't you just suck it up and have some discipline? There may be an element of truth to that, but it's not just some lazy, irresponsible mom who can't make do on her own. Right. There's some considerations, and let's face it, it used to be that going to college, you would put yourself through college, right, whether it be working or borrowing your own money, but there is increasingly now, parents see themselves as responsible for some or all of putting their kids through college. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Is that wrong? I'm not so sure you have to answer that question. You simply have to address it and find a way to make it work, if that's something that you decide to do. I am inclined not to pay for my kids' college, because I think that what happens is that makes them, it makes them, what they obtain too easily, they don't value as much.
Right.
But I also know that the cost of college has risen far faster than the cost of living, and so it was easier for me to go to college than it will be for my kids from a price perspective. We have to be sensitive to changes in the world and the effects on the family.
Yeah, exactly, I agree.
Yeah.
And I look at that attitude like, is it right or is it wrong? And that brings up some interesting thoughts, because the legal system itself is an adversarial system. It is an adversarial system, which means what can I gain? Who's right? Who's wrong?
Who wins? Who loses?
Who wins? Who loses? But in that type of system, somebody has to win. Somebody has to lose. And if they were to take it, reevaluate the way we do things with families, and instead of making it who's right and who's wrong, change it to what works and what doesn't work. That way you're incorporating all the parties. So if you and I got into a conversation and I'm like, okay, well, you're wrong, I'm right, then obviously you're the bad person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the good person, right? Vice versa.
And I'm going to spend all my time trying to persuade you that that's not the case.
And if you do persuade me, then I'm the one that's going to be the bad person, right? But if we had a specific goal, and the way you're doing things doesn't work, and the way I was doing things doesn't work, then we're not looking at who's right and wrong. We're looking at me, you, and the objective, and what works and what doesn't work. In the court system, the objective would be the children. So that the courts aren't thinking what would work, they're thinking who's right and who's wrong.
Let me challenge even that, though. I think that one of the problems we have is that it's a cop-out too often to say, well, what I'm doing is for the sake of the children, therefore you can't question my judgment because I was doing it for the kids, and so anything I do to protect or to enhance the welfare of children is beyond question. Mm-hmm. Which is why I have taken, and I reserve the right to change my mind. I don't know if I will ever change my mind about this. Best interest of the family, collectively and individually. Doing stuff for kids at the expense of mom and dad is ultimately going to hurt the kids. If you give mom and dad an impossible task, if you order them to do things that just they can't do or won't do or just struggle with, those kids aren't going to benefit from that. Yeah, I see your intentions are good, Your Honor. Mm-hmm. But the family's never operated like this. Mm-hmm. How do you think they're going to do it now? And even if you do, grudging compliance with court orders is not what the court wanted. Right. So I look at that and I say, yeah, make it so that it works, but make it so that every cog in this machine is getting the oil and doing no less work or no less stress on it than is absolutely necessary, or you're just going to make it seize up.
Right. And that's what the family system is. It's a machine. Whether there's a divorce or not, it's still a family system, right? As soon as you have kids with somebody, there's no such thing as a real divorce. There is what was once a fight is now more distant, and you still have a fight without the benefits of living in the same household. It is still a machine. And to isolate, say, well, you know what, this cog is now over here and this cog is over here, so let's not give this one, visitation rights to the rest of it. And the machine doesn't function. It really doesn't function. And what happens to these other cogs is that they spin out of control. And so, and then it works the same way in mental health. It's one of the things we look at. So.
I'm just going to throw this at you because you haven't heard this before, which is nice because it gives you watching the chance to see that maybe he's got it all figured out, which you may want to talk to Ricky again, but sometimes you may struggle with it, which just goes to show you there are many different ways to look at this. But let me throw this out to you. You've got one parent who, it's fairly obvious, is just malicious. And that may be because that person chooses to be malicious, or it may be that that person is born malicious, like a sociopath or something like that. It seems frequently that those people get treated unusually, with unusual favoritism. It's like courts are like, oh man, give that person whatever he or she wants because trying to reason with this person is so difficult, it's much easier just to kind of placate them and appease them. You ever see anything like that, or do you see it the other way? It's pretty obvious to pick out the bad guy and then punish the bad guy.
Well, and I mean, working in the mental health field, I'm not surprised. I get clients that act the same way, and they take that position that in their lives. I'm the judge, so I wouldn't doubt it. I've never seen it in the court system. But I don't have that view that you would have. So, but knowing what I know about mental health, I'm just totally not surprised.
Let's go back to that idea about the presumption of joint legal and physical custody.
Mhm.
Now, for those of you that are listening or watching, I'm not going to talk about the definitions of that. If you want to look that up later, you could go to the website or you could look it up online yourself. But just know that essentially physical custody is where the kids are living, where the overnights they're spending. Legal custody, in a nutshell, is the power to make decisions for the kids, medical decisions, educational decisions, religious and moral upbringing, things like that. A lot of people, and correct me if I understand you, or they'd say, start with the presumption that joint physical and joint legal custody will be what's ordered. Let's presume that the children, there should be joint physical and joint legal custody. Mm-hmm. And for those of you that are watching, I'm not going to define what that is, but just briefly, physical custody in Utah is where the kids are spending the night, overnights. So even if you are taking care of the children for 10 hours a day and then the other parent picks them up, gives them dinner, a bath, and puts them in bed, if they're overnight at that parent has custody that day. And overnights determine whether you have a sole or joint physical custody. 111 overnights or more in Utah is joint custody, even though a 50-50 split would be 182 for one parent and 183 for the other. That would total 365. Utah looks at joint physical custody as 111 or more overnights. Anything in that range. Anything less than 111, so 110 or less, is sole or primary physical custody. Legal custody, rather, is the decision making, the power to decide things like where the kids go to school, what kind of medical or other health care they get, moral and religious upbringing. So let me see if I understand you. You would say, let's start with the presumption that the kids would be best in a joint custody situation. And then, if somebody says, I disagree, let the evidence push one way or the other. No, the kids would be better off in the primary or sole custody of mom. No, the kids would be better off in the primary or sole custody of dad. Or, no, 50-50 equal isn't the best, but 157 overnights for dad may work. Now, again, I'm not talking about a situation where dad is an airline pilot. Mm-hmm. Dad's never going to be, rarely if ever is dad going to be able to make 50-50 joint physical custody work.
Right.
If mom or dad is a drug addict and always institutionalized or in a rubber room, joint legal may not work. If dad molested the kids, if mom was a Munchausen by proxy syndrome kind of patient, then we're going to differ. But let's talk about that. That rarely comes up. So let's look at a situation where mom and dad have split and they live within 5-10 minutes distance of each other, maybe 20 or even 30. Mm-hmm. Tell me why would you say, let's just presume that joint is best for the kids? Because I will tell you this, and you may or may not know this, but there are a lot of lawyers, and I have my theories as to why they think this way, but there are a lot of lawyers who think that a presumption of joint legal is already the law in Utah. It was passed in, I believe, 2012. Up until then, it could be awarded, but there was no presumption. Mm-hmm. But it is now presumed that unless you can show it shouldn't happen, both parents will maintain joint legal custody. So why maintain that there should be joint physical custody? Tell us about that.
There's so many reasons. And I think that if you got two parents that are fairly healthy, like you said, not like something that is
right. No substance abuse, no mental problems, no mm-hmm. felonies.
Right.
They've got their quirks, but they're fairly normal and they're not a danger to anyone or themselves.
Right. So, and a lot of that is for the health of the child. For the health of the child, just right out the gate, having both parents involved with their lives. A parent doesn't have to be perfect, whether it's the mom or the dad. But what they get from their parents, knowing that their parents are there, the security.
What about people that'll tell you, it's like, well, I'm better educated than my spouse, and I spend more time with the children. Yes, my spouse does spend time, but because of his job, he's gone most of the day, and our kids are 4 and 5 years old. So I spend more time with them. What do you say to somebody who said, so therefore I should get primary custody?
Right. Yeah, I totally disagree with that. I was like, I mean, it doesn't matter how much education you have. It's not like you're going to be the professor of your child or whatever. Like,
It's,
what
yeah.
it boils down to is the natural connection of both parents.
One of Malcolm Gladwell's books talks about this idea that, if your child started reading at 3,
Yeah.
that does not mean that that child has a head start on intellectual capacity for the rest of his life.
Right.
Because there are other kids that may not start to learn to read until they're in kindergarten. But then you know what? They learn to read just as well as the kid that's been reading since 3. They catch up. Just like kids may be taller and stuff like that, eventually they all kind of get to be about the same height.
Mm-hmm.
You may have somebody who has a growth spurt. You may have a girl that grows to her full height in junior high and never, she's the tallest girl in school forever. She may even be the tallest kid. And so I think that's kind of interesting, is this idea that's like, well, I'm a nuclear physicist and my spouse is a garbage man or a
Right.
waitress. That does not mean that somehow your kids will be better off living with you because you're so much smarter. By the same token, my dad was a dentist, he's retired. He spent a lot less time with us than my mom did, who was a stay-at-home mom.
Right.
I never looked at my dad as someone who didn't love me or didn't care because I saw him after work. That's when I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it is other people tend to believe that, even though they might have lived the same kind of life. What do you say to that?
Oh, I mean, that's a struggle. I really, when it boils down to it, really doesn't matter what somebody's parents do, what they do, what they don't do. What matters is the quality of time, or even the time that they spend with them. We weren't born, or we don't have a manual that says this is how to raise a kid. Well, we do.
Well, then,
but
why? So then, why not? There are still a great number of people that'll say, "Hey, the kids will still spend time with that non-custodial parent on a regular basis. I mean,
like
every other weekend, 2 weekends a month, everything. Yeah, look at that. 2 weekends a month and one night a week for in the middle of the week for 3 hours. I mean, they're going to get consistent, regular contact. What's wrong with that?
Oh gosh, well, if you think about it, 1 weekend a month, 2 weekends plus. So at the end of 18 years, that's approximately, and you could do the math, but that's between about 800 overnights to 1,000 overnights in an 18-year span.
Yeah. It's about less than it's less than a third of each year.
So if say we conduce all that, and we just packaged it and just said, hey, well, here's the deal. Since you get about 1,000 here, you get the first 3 years, and then you don't get to see your kid for the rest of until he's 18.
Okay.
That's a prison sentence.
Right, and let me.
That's a prison sentence.
I agree. Let me
Right?
play devil's advocate. It's like, yeah, but it's spaced out. I mean, granted, it's every other week, and the kids are spending the majority of the time with one parent, but it's they still get to see that parent. In fact, some of those guys, and let's talk about men simply because they are the majority of the non-custodial parents still.
Right.
Even though that's changing. He was never around anyway. He was gone all day. I mean, the mom was taking care of the kids from the time they woke up until the time they got back home from school, and then dad rolled in around 5:30 or 6. So we're simply now, since they don't live under the same roof, we're simply apportioning that same amount of time. Dad still spends about the same number of hours.
Right.
It's just that they're all with him compacted into that weekend and 3 hours a week. What's wrong with that?
Adjustment. You don't see dad for 2 weeks. You go into dad's house, dad's life. From that point forward, dad's life or even mom's life, it moves on.
Exactly.
And then also, and then child comes in 2 weeks later, and a lot's changed, and there could be some confusion there. There could be, as time goes by, that happens more and more, and every single time that the parent or the child shows up to the house, it can feel very, what's the word, exclusive or excluding? Excluding.
My son is turning 18,
Yeah.
and I feel like my wife and I both feel like non-custodial parents because he spends so little time with us now.
Right.
He has a girlfriend, he has the ability to drive, he has a job, and so he spends less and less time with us. Now, that's a good thing because he's maturing into an adult and he will be independent.
Right.
But the fact that I had worked a full day, my kids still saw me every day. And occasionally I might go on a business trip, but my kids have seen me every day, not just on weekends. I don't just camp out here at my office
Right.
and then say, oh hey, it's Friday at 6, time to spend time with my dad. So my kids got to show me what the pictures they drew, even if it was only 5 minutes, and then they had to brush their teeth and go to bed. Or even if I only got to spend a little time with them giving them a bath. I may not have spent nearly as much time, but I got to see them every day, and I remember as a kid feeling the same way. I felt secure, whether I was conscious of it. My mom and dad were under the same roof with me every day. I was part of a family. Now, mom and dad live apart now, but they should see their kids as much, both of them should see and interact with their kids as much as possible. I can't understand why anybody would want to marginalize either mom or dad. I don't know why they would say it's sufficient time. It's like, okay, perhaps it is. Maybe if you cut back the time even more, one of the kids would commit suicide or become a delinquent. But these kids can spend more time with dad. Why not let them? Now, let's not even talk about the financial impact. The less time you spend with a parent, the more time you spend with the other, the more money that parent gets. We're not even going to go into that because that's obvious. If people are motivated by money, they'll say anything in order to say, it's like, that parent's a bad parent, but I need the money. Let's talk about taking the money out for now, though, even though they're almost inseparable.
So money's gone. Money's not. Say okay.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems to me that how could anyone argue with the idea that kids being involved in the lives of both parents as much as possible is going to make them better, more well-rounded kids?
You know, and it boils down to it's an integrated lifestyle. There's a lot of role modeling that happens even in those 5-minute intervention or those 5-minute time periods with your kid. You're on your way to school, dropping your kid off. Between the school or between the house and the school, you're in the car with them. Even if you're not having a conversation with them, there's modeling.
That's funny. You're not the first person to say that. Pointing out that it's like those, even though you may not be teaching life skills or reading from the scriptures to them, they're still learning. I mean, like I said, if you flip some guy off who cuts you off, if you turn on a radio and listen to the news or you listen to music, all of those little things are having an impact.
Oh, totally. They have a huge impact. So all those little things added up over 18 years has a huge impact because after 18 years, they're going into their own lives. Right?
That they are.
So when we look at that 1,000 days and just having that, I mean, I don't know about you, but it doesn't make sense to me. Like if somebody's seeing their kids every other weekend, I mean, there's got to be some sort of integration that helps, that really pulls. And I don't know if I'm going too far off.
Let's do a little rapid fire on this.
Okay.
Let me just tell you about it. Again, we haven't covered this in advance.
Okay.
Joint custody, there's too much bouncing back and forth. Mom, dads, mom, dads, mom, dads. What do you say to that? It's better.
I honestly say deal with it. But, I mean, at the same time, like, the distance, all that stuff's kind of...
The kids are suffering, Ricky.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, how are they suffering?
Right, now that's interesting, because what I would say is, number one, they may go back and forth a little bit more, but then again, like you say, that modeling can be going on at all times. If dad's driving around in a car filling with carbon monoxide all the time, that's not good. But if it's just like, I pick the kids up from school on my 2 days, and then you pick them up on your 2 days, they're still going from school to home. I mean, yeah, you could make it so that they're ping-ponging back and forth every other day.
Right.
That's a stupid schedule anyway. But week on, week off for some kinds of kids works, if they're a little older. 2, 5, that sort of thing can work. 3 days, 4 days. There are ways to do it so that you're actually doing almost the same number of pickups and drops.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's one thing people say. I don't get that one either. Others might say, well, it's just not fair. If mom takes care of the kids during their waking hours until dinner time, and dad just picks them up, well, he got the benefit of all that labor. Okay, so, and I'd say, okay, well, where do the kids factor in there? I don't hear, it seems to me like you're just claiming that mom was put upon or dad was put upon. If you're claiming you care about the kids are just going to be saying, oh, well, this is great, we're spending, I don't think any kid ever said, I love dad less, or mom less, and that's the case may be, because I was with the other parent most of the day.
Right.
Now here's a legitimate question. What if that parent who takes care of the kids all day says, well, I'm the heavy. I'm the one that gets to tell them, don't run in the street, don't get your clothes dirty, you've got to come in, you've got to go out, you can't play with this person. And then the other parent picks them up and it's like, school's out, dinner, watch some TV, maybe we'll do homework, and then they go to sleep. Again, is that...
I am curious to why you're the heavy, other than a judge's court order. Does that make sense?
Okay, let me see if it does make, I think it does make sense. You're saying, yeah, if you want to be a tyrant to your kids,
Right.
And see yourself as having to crack the whip all day long,
Yep.
then, first of all, why do you have sole custody anyway?
Mhm.
Seems you'd welcome less time having to be the disciplinarian.
Yeah.
Let the other parent share those burdens.
I have a healthy family, and there's research out there, but a healthy family we call this executive subsystem, which is the two parents, the parental unit. So say it's a regular, normal family,
Under the
still
same
married,
roof.
under the same roof, and they're working. A lot of what we do in therapy is to get those two working together in order to correct the mental health of the children. If they have a united front, but it takes both of them agreeing into that united front. If one person is saying, okay, well, if they're taking all of the burden, usually that's by their choice, right?
Yeah, and then if they're going to complain about being a martyr, it's like, hey, you have your reward. Don't act like, okay.
And we see this time and time again too, because a parent will take that on. I mean, divorces are ugly. Not all of them, but some of them are ugly. And typically when there's
Most of them
well,
are
yeah,
ugly.
when there's a divorce, there's going to be somebody in the divorce that's saying, hey, you know what, this person is wrong, and to prove to my family that it's okay to divide or to have this divorce, I'm going to prove that I'm a better parent, I'm more fit, and so they start taking it on. They munch it. And so what happens is they intentionally, and this doesn't always happen, but sometimes they intentionally push the other parent out, who could take on some of the burden, but it's more of a self-esteem, more of an ego issue.
Now, here's a legitimate question. Sometimes, and this will bring money back in briefly for this, some people want joint custody because it saves them money. But then when the kids are with that parent, the money-saving parent, they're completely hands-off, they're detached, they're aloof, because they don't really want to be involved in the kids' lives. They simply like the joint custody award because it saves them some dough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any problem with that?
Well, yes and no. I think that it's important to assist where assistance is needed. There's got to be some sort of balance. But what you're saying, you're talking about motive of a person. I'm going to take the responsibility of the kid because it's a financial reward system. Yeah, I totally have a problem with that.
I don't think anybody would. Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's enough evidence to show, hey, this joint custodian just doesn't feed, doesn't clothe, doesn't do the laundry, doesn't do homework with them or make sure their homework's done, doesn't make sure they're not playing in the streets with bags of glass.
Right.
I mean, duh. Obviously, that kid, that parent is going to hang him or herself, and a change is necessary, or the award should be to the more responsible parent. But to suggest that it's like, well, he's just doing this or she's just doing this to save money, even if that's true, let the kids bear the brunt of it before you see if it's a problem. If it turns out that I did it to save money, but I'm a model parent, who cares? Who cares? It's like, yeah, I wanted joint custody mainly so I could save money, and I don't really particularly care about the kids, but I'm doing a bang-up job, or I'm doing a sufficient job. The kids are even if the kids don't realize it, they're going to say, hey, I'm glad that mom and dad are around. Dad always seemed a little aloof and didn't seem to care as much about us, and we got to run free. But you and I both know, for different reasons, there are kids who got to run free and wild, and when they become parents, they say, I hated it. I wanted more structure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are some that don't. There's some like, hey, I have lax parents and I'm going to be a lax parent, but I have a lax parent. But there are some who say, look, yeah, I wish my parents would have brought the hammer down more because I lack discipline as an adult and I'm not going to let my own kids be that way.
And in my experience,
kind of the Ned Flanders model.
Exactly. And in my experience, the kids that act that way, when you do put them in a structured environment, I've been in this field. I've been in the mental health field for 10 years. I haven't been a therapist for 10 years. But I've been in the mental health field, and I've seen some pretty severe cases where once they have structure, they're functioning, they're healthy. And so when you say that, I mean, that's the evidence of it, right? And so, where are we going with this? My mind drew a blank.
Take a moment then. So I'll and we can edit this part. We were just talking about, there's some parents may take joint custody for purely self-serving reasons,
Yeah,
but
okay.
again, it's if the kids suffer, well then change it. But if the kids don't suffer, and even if the kids are like, yeah, we're not as happy with dad or mom, but we're still happier having the contact. So we can actually at that point just switch gears. In fact, we can finish if you want.
It's up to you.
So let's just do that.
I dedicated, and oh yeah, we're cool.
So let's just do that. So what we'll do is we'll just edit that so that kind of brings it to an end. So let's just, so I'll just thank you. You'll leave your contact information one more time. All right. Ricky, it's been a pleasure. And again, your opinions may differ from others, and my opinions may differ from yours. But the purpose of these meetings and these discussions is to let people understand that there are many different viewpoints, none of which is necessarily superior to the other. It's just good to consider different viewpoints, different ideas, and find out which works best for this particular family.
I agree. It's not about, like I mentioned earlier, it's not about being right or wrong. It's what's working and what's not working. And that's the way we gotta look at it.
And I think too many people have blinders on, and what they see as having worked doesn't mean it's the only thing that works, or the only way to do things.
Right.
Well, for the benefit of everybody listening, if they'd like to get in touch with you again, would you just repeat name of your practice and your contact information?
Okay, well, it's not my practice. It's somebody else's. I work in a private practice. But my name is Ricky Scoggan, and my number is 801-809-2601.